Hello everyone, my name is Rob, welcome to Kinetic Rugby League. In this video I'm going to be giving you my NRL round 26 tips and predictions. Now if you want to see how I got on last week, you can check the pinned comment down below. You can also check that pinned comment for any major updates for this week. But also I'm going to be trying something slightly different with the graphics. I've been messing around with AI art for the past few days and wanted to kind of test it out in my latest video as basically as representations for the NRL teams. So I thought I'd try them out. Let me know what you think. We'll see how it goes. But let's get started on the first game for this week. So kicking things off, we had the Penrith Panthers versus the Parramatta Eels, and starting with the Panthers, they currently sit in first place on the ladder. They've won 5 in the last 5 and their home record is 8 wins and 2 losses. They also won last time out against the Titans. This week they'll be hosting from the Bluebet Stadium in Penrith. Looking at the team that they've initially announced so far for this week, in the backs it includes Edwards, Taruva, Peachy, Crichton, Toto, Luai and Cleary. In the forwards, it includes Leota, Cogger, Fisher-Harris, Hosking, Martin and Yo. And on the bench is Luke, Smith, Linu and Garner. Looking at percentage stats for the Panthers, they have a 77% win rate, 82% completion rate and a tackle efficiency of 87.4%. Moving on to the Parramatta Eels, they currently sit in 11th place on the ladder. They've only won 1 in the last 5, and their away record is 4 wins and 7 losses. They also lost last time out against the Roosters. Looking at the team that they've announced for this week so far, in the backs it includes Gutherson, Sevo, Penasini, Simonson, Russell, Assey and Brown. In the forwards is Campbell Gillard, Lussick, Barlow, Mattison, Cartwright and Hopgood. And on the bench is Moretti, Lane, Grigg and Offahengawi. Looking at percentage stats for the Eels, it includes a 48% win rate, 74% completion rate and a tackle efficiency of 86.6%. For me, this is one of the straightforward games of the week. I think there's a good handful of them. This is certainly one of them. The Eels aren't in any kind of free fall. I don't think they're, I don't think there's much to panic about, but I understand that, and I think a lot of their fans understand that top 8 chances are pretty much gone at this point. So, and even without Mitchell Moses, who I believe is out for the rest of the season, it's just not looking good for them. It's going to be a hard reset for next year. We'll see who they eventually bring in, but just a hard reset is needed. I don't see the Eels putting up any real challenge here. The only question mark really is that Cogger's going to play at number 9 instead of Kenny. So it's not a major change, but it might highlight. I mean, we even saw a couple of weeks ago when Kenny wasn't available for the Panthers that, they struggled at times, but I don't think it's going to be a huge difference. And the Eels have been struggling the past few weeks. They've won 1 in the last 5. They're not that strong away. I mean, they're not awful, but it's not great. Panthers are really strong at home, great form, great performances the last couple of weeks. So for me, a strong statement win is likely. I cannot see, even when I talk about Brown and Gutherson as key players, key creative players for the Eels, I can't see them overpowering this Panthers team to such an insane degree. I just don't see it personally. So with that being said, I'm going to go with the Panthers to win, 13+. Next up, we have the New Zealand Warriors versus the St. George Illawarra Dragons, and starting with the Warriors, they currently sit in 3rd place on the ladder. They've won 5 in the last 5, and their home record is 7 wins and 4 losses. They also won last time out against the Seagulls. This week, they'll be hosting from the Go Media Stadium in Auckland. Looking at the squad that they've announced so far for this week, in the backs it includes Nickel Klokstad, Wateni Zalesniak, Berry, Pompey, Montoya, Metcalf and Johnson. In the forwards, it includes Fanoa Blake, Egan, Afoa, Curran, Niokore and Harris. On the bench is Walker, Ford, Sirinen and Lussick. Looking at percentage stats for the Warriors, it includes a 68% win rate, 78% completion rate and a tackle efficiency of 88%. Moving on to the Dragons, they currently sit in 16th place on the ladder. They've only won 1 in the last 5, and their away record is 0 wins and 11 losses. They also lost last time out against Melbourne Storm. Looking at the squad that they've announced so far for this week, in the backs it includes Sloan, Fegai, Suli, Lomax, Ravalawa, Amon and Hunt. In the forwards it includes Francis Molo, Liddell, Laurie, Burns, Russell and Michael Molo. And on the bench is Mulhyson, Ryan Coachman, Murdoch Masilla and Musgrove. Looking at percentage stats for the Dragons, it includes a 23% win rate, 75% completion rate and a tackle efficiency of 87.1%. This one is another one that feels fairly straightforward to me. I believe last week one thing I mentioned in favour of the Dragons was that for the past few weeks they've kind of been using the same team for the past few weeks, they've had some consistency with their squad, which is a good thing. But this Warriors team for me is a bit too strong. Now, the last few weeks haven't been that convincing, especially against the Tigers and then the Seagulls. And I have given positive reviews of those two teams, not to a point where they should be beating the Warriors, of course. I had the Warriors to beat both of those teams, but a lot more convincingly than what they did. I do think this week it is going to follow the pattern that I was hoping for the last 2 weeks, with the Warriors having a dominating win. But I do think the Dragons will find ways to put up points because they have that consistency in the team. The Warriors have been slightly shaky at times, while still getting the wins, of course. So you can acknowledge that they've been strong enough to get the wins, which is the most important thing, but acknowledge that there are some gaps there that teams are finding ways to exploit them. So I think the Dragons will find some opportunities. They will have their moments, but overall the Warriors will be too strong. I think they'll put in a much more clean performance, and that will be much easier with the Dragons team that hasn't even won a game away this season. They've only won one in the last 5. So for me, I think the Warriors will just be far too superior for this one. So I'm going to go with the Warriors to win, 13+. Next up, we have the Dolphins versus the North Queensland Cowboys. Starting with the Dolphins, they currently sit in 14th place on the ladder. They've won 0 in the last 5, and their home record is 4 wins and 6 losses. They also lost last time out against the Tigers. This week, they'll be hosting from the Suncorp Stadium in Brisbane. Looking at the squad that they've initially announced for this week, in the backs it includes Tabai Fidel, Isako, Niu, Jennings, Bostock, Nikarima and O'Sullivan. In the forwards, they have Jesse Bromwich, Graham, Nichols, Kafusi, Lemuelu and Kenneth Bromwich. On the bench is Wallace, Kurt Aitken and SASA. Looking at percentage stats for the Dolphins, they have a 36% win rate, 79% completion rate and a tackle efficiency of 86.4%. Moving on to the Cowboys, they currently sit in 9th place on the ladder. They've won 2 in the last 5, and their away record is 3 wins and 7 losses. They also lost last time out against the Sharks. Looking at the squad that they've initially announced for this week, in the backs includes Drinkwater, Felt, Labour, Hiku, Talangi, Dearden and Townsend. In the forwards they have McLean, Robson, Taumalolo, Leilua, Lukey and Cotter. And on the bench is Granville, Hess, Neem and, I'm going to mess this one up so much, Finafeiki, I think. We'll go with that one, but you know who I mean. Looking at percentage stats for the Cowboys, they have a 50% win rate, 80% completion rate, and a tackle efficiency of 85.6%. I would also say this game is another one of those clear ones for me. Although, when looking at the margins, I am slightly more inclined to go with a 1-12 on this one, and that's only because, look, we know how poor the Dolphins have been. They haven't won a game in the last 5. Yes, their home record is okay, and the Cowboys have been awful away. I think the Dolphins, in a few instances, have kept games within reach. Like, some of them have, like, they've not been challenging by the end of it. They've had, like, moments within the game where they've looked competitive, they've kept it close, and then towards the end, it's just gotten away from them. So I think for a solid portion of the game, they can stay within range. Pair that with the fact that the Cowboys, they've lost 3 in a row, and the 2 games that they did win in the last 5, I believe were both kind of narrow-ish victories. Well, both within the 1-12 range anyway. So I'm kind of losing trust with the Cowboys a little bit, to be honest. It is a tough one because, you know, about a month or so ago, they were great. They were absolutely incredible. And that has kind of dipped. I still think they've got more than enough quality in this team to beat the Dolphins, a struggling Dolphins team. But right now I've lost trust with them to demolish the Dolphins as they should. Based on how it's gone for the Dolphins, they could absolutely get battered here. So if you were to go with a huge margin for the Cowboys to win this one, I would have no issues with that one. I would say fair play, makes complete sense. But I just can't do it. I'm more than confident to go with the Cowboys win because I'm going to put them right at the end of this 1-12 range. But I just can't see it being anything above that, especially with how the Cowboys have been. And the Dolphins have been finding ways to make games competitive. So for me, I think that's a fair balance. Having Tabai Fidel at fullback as well for the Dolphins is huge. Not having him wasted at centre is a big help for them. So hopefully he can create chances. I'd like to see a good finish to the end of the season for the Dolphins, even though they're probably not going to make the top 8. Again, mathematically, can they do it? I don't think so, but it'd be nice to see a good finish. Things started well, tapered off because of injuries, and performances were poor. So a strong finish would be great for the new team. But I'm going to go with the Cowboys to win, 1-12 points. Next up, we have Melbourne Storm versus Gold Coast Titans, starting with Melbourne Storm. They currently sit in 4th place on the ladder. They've won 3 in the last 5. Their home record is 8 wins and 3 losses. They also won last time out against the Dragons. This week, they'll be hosting from Amy Park in Melbourne. Now, looking at the squad that they've announced so far for this week, in the backs, it includes Meaney, Warbrick, Seve, Tonamaipea, Coates, Munster and Hughes. In the forwards, they have Kamikamitha, Grant, Welsh, Liaro, Katoa and Asfa Solomona, and on the bench is Garlick, Eisenhuth, Moroa and McDonald. Looking at percentage stats for Melbourne Storm, they have a 64% win rate, 80% completion rate and a tackle efficiency of 86.9%. Moving on to the Titans, they currently sit in 13th place on the ladder. They've won 1 in the last 5 and their away record is 3 wins and 8 losses. They also lost last time out against the Panthers. Looking at the squad that they've announced for this week, in the backs includes Brimson, Khan Pereira, Kelly, Shop, Jojo Fafita, Foran and Weaver. In the forwards is Fotuaika, Randall, Jolliffe, David Fafita, Haas and Tino for Asumalawi. On the bench is Leeming, Liu, Stimson and Alec. Looking at percentage stats for the Titans, they have a 36% win rate, 80% completion rate and a tackle efficiency of 85.8%. So for me, this is another one of those easier ones. Now I do think, looking at the individuals for the Titans, they do have strong players in the forwards that can cause chaos. You look at Tino Fa'asu Malawi, you look at David Fafita. Jolliffe was a strong player. I first learnt about him really in the World Cup. I think he played for Ireland, if I'm not mistaken, and Fotuaika as well. So they have a really strong forward pack, and they can certainly compete with Melbourne Storm. And I mentioned last week that if they want to put up any kind of fight against the Panthers, they need to dominate in the forward pack, and that would give players like Weaver more time. So I'm kind of going to say the same thing again. Weaver is now playing back-to-back weeks, but there is no Jaden Campbell. So Brimson steps back into the number 1 role. Kieran Foran is still there and is experienced enough, can do a solid job with his kicking game. He's creative from time to time, but for me, this is fairly simple. We're starting to see a much better Melbourne Storm team. They let in way too many points against the Dragons last week for my liking, for what Melbourne Storm should be doing at this stage, but I do think there is a lot of potential for a massacre this week, and I don't really see if, how and when it gets better for the Titans for the remainder of the season. But for me, it's kind of only up. It's only forwards for Melbourne Storm at this point. So I'm going to go with Storm to win, 13+. Next up, we have the Sydney Roosters versus the West Tigers, starting with the Roosters, who currently sit in 10th place on the ladder. They've won 4 in the last 5. Their home record is 7 wins and 4 losses. They also won last time out against the Eels. This week, they'll be hosting from the Allianz Stadium in Sydney. Now, looking at the team that they've announced so far for this week, in the backs, it includes Manu, Tupou, Billy Smith, Allen, Swali, Kiri and Walker. In the forwards is Warrior Hargreaves, Brandon Smith, Collins, Wong Butcher and Radley. On the bench is Sandon Smith, Baker, May and Crichton. Looking at percentage stats for the Roosters, they have a 50% win rate, 74% completion rate and a tackle efficiency of 87.2%. Moving on to the Tigers, they currently sit in 17th place on the ladder. They've won 1 in the last 5 and their away record is 1 win and 9 losses. Now, they actually won last time out against the Dolphins. Now, take a look at the squad that they've announced for this week. In the backs, it includes Bula, Norfoluma, Riley, Kapoa, Tupou, Laurie and Smith. In the forwards is Otokomanu, Coruscant, Clemmer, Papali'i, Bateman and Polly. And on the bench is Matamua, Blore, Twal and Seyfarth. Now, looking at percentage stats for the Tigers, they have a 18% win rate, 75% completion rate and a tackle efficiency of 88.6%. And again, another clear-cut one for me in favour of the Roosters. I do think, the Tigers, again, can fight. That's the same word that I've been using the last few weeks to describe the Tigers. They can fight. They will find ways to score. This Roosters team isn't impenetrable by any means, but I'm now at a point with the Roosters where I do trust them. And the Tigers, I think everything that they pretty much had went into last week against a depleted Dolphins team I'm glad they won, and especially because I predicted them to win. So I'm glad that they got the win. I'm happy for them because they have been fighting. They did deserve a win at some point. I think it goes straight back to a loss this week. The Roosters, maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago, this would be a game. If the Tigers were where they're at now compared to, or playing against a Roosters team where they were a month and a half, 2 months ago, I would genuinely question the Roosters being able to put up a win this week. But given that I now trust the Roosters, they're putting consistent performances, I trust them to get a really strong win here. Now, I have also mentioned the last few weeks that not having Sam Walker in the number 7 role is hugely detrimental, because I think he is the best option that they've got paired with Keary. But I do kind of feel a little bit disappointed for Hutchison not to be in the team, because I think he's done a pretty fair job at number 7. So it's unfortunate for him, but I do genuinely think that Sam Walker gives them the best opportunity. The other question mark here for me is, I like Joey Manu at number 1, but without Tedesco, especially with how consistent he's been the last couple of weeks as well, is a little bit of a question mark. I still, of course, trust Joey Manu at number 1, but he really flourishes when he plays on the right centre position. So we'll kind of see how that goes. I think Tedesco is back. I think he's back next week, so not a huge disruption. And it's not the worst game to have to deal with a few changes here and there. And it's a good game to get Sam Walker back into the flow of things, really, getting him linking up with Keary. So I expect a strong win from the Roosters. I think, again, they'll be pushed back from the Tigers, but the Roosters will find ways to, limit the number of points. They'll put up more points. I think all the issues that they had at the, first half of the season are kind of over at this point. Again, they're not impenetrable, so I do think the Tigers will find ways to score, but the Roosters will ultimately be just way too strong. So I'm going to go with the Roosters to win, 13+. Next up, we have the Canberra Raiders versus the Brisbane Broncos. Starting with the Raiders, they currently sit in 6th place on the ladder. They've won 2 in the last 5, and their home record is 7 wins and 4 losses. They also won last time out against the Bulldogs. This week, they'll be hosted from the GIO Stadium in Canberra. Now, looking at the squad that they've announced so far for this week, in the backs, it includes Rapana, Hopoate, Croker, Timoko, Kotrich, Frawley, and Fogarty. In the forwards is Papali'i, Wolford, Tarpany, Young, Whitehead, and Horsburgh. And on the bench is Starling, Gula, Schiller, and Mariota. Looking at percentage stats for the Raiders, they have a 59% win rate, 76% completion rate, and a tackle efficiency of 87.7%. Moving on to the Broncos, they currently sit in 2nd place on the ladder. They've won 5 in the last 5. Their away record is 10 wins and 1 loss. They're also on a bye last week. Now, looking at the squad that they've announced for this week, in the backs it includes Walsh, Oates, Staggs, Farnworth, Cobbo, Mam, and Madden. In the forwards is Flegler, Walters, Haas, Capewell, Ricky, and Carrigan. And on the bench is Smoothie, Piacora, Hetherington, and Jensen. Looking at percentage stats for the Broncos, they have a 77% win rate, 77% completion rate, and a tackle efficiency of 86.7%. And again, this is another one of those games where it does lean quite heavily one way for me, and that is towards the Broncos. Now, there's a few things to consider in this game, and I'm leaning towards a 1-12 on this one, and I'll explain why. The obvious reason against the Broncos is the fact that Adam Reynolds isn't there. Now, as a counterpoint to that, Jock Madden takes his place at number 7. One thing that doesn't make that any more detrimental is the fact that everyone else that we consider to be part of the Broncos' first team is there. Reynolds is the only usual starter that is missing, so Jock Madden can come into a team that even without Reynolds still flourishes on individual quality. So he's going to be working that right-hand side with Ricky, with Staggs, with Cobbo. And that will obviously include Reece Walsh propping up round the back to create opportunities. So they're not completely hamstrung without Adam Reynolds, because the rest of the first team is still there. You look at the forwards, Payne Haas is going to find ways to get multiple post-contact meters again and again and again. He just does it week in, week out. Flegler is a strong pairing for him in the forwards. Ricky and Capewell are going to find ways to break the line, be dangerous. And Carrigan, we know, is a class act in the middle of the park at 13. So in the backs, they're at full strength. In the forwards, they're at full strength. On the bench, pretty much full strength for the exception of, I guess, Marty Tapau, but it's nothing crazy. They, still got Hetherington on there, Piakura as well. So I think the Broncos will be fine, but the Raiders at this point, they've been far from perfect, but I think at this point, their forward pack, I think, is strong enough to compete with the Broncos. Not only that, but they are kind of fighting for their lives in the top 8. They might be let off with the fact that the Rabbitohs might struggle to retain a spot, so they might not be a challenge, but the Raiders are slowly collapsing and they might find themselves outside the top 8. So even though this is like one of the toughest games they could get, the fight that we're going to see from the Raiders, I think, will be, very well pronounced. But I don't think it's going to be enough to match the quality of the Broncos. So I think the forward pack will go toe-to-toe with the Broncos. We look at who they've got, and includes Papali'i, Tarpany, Horsburgh, Young, Whitehead, and Wolford through the middle at hooker. They'll do a fine job. But ultimately, it's the backs, it's the creativity of the likes of Cobbo, Staggs, Farnworth, Walsh, Mam, that will create all these opportunities and really force the Raiders to struggle out wide. Through the middle, they'll be fine, but out wide, the Raiders, I think, will struggle, and the Broncos will find ways to get this done. So I think it'll be a competitive game. I don't think the Broncos are going to completely run away with this one, even though they absolutely could. But with that being said, I'm going to go with the Broncos to win, 1-12 points. Next up, with the Canterbury Bulldogs versus the Manly Sea Eagles. Starting with the Bulldogs, they currently sit in 15th place on the ladder. They've won 1 in the last 5, and their home record is 4 wins and 7 losses. They also lost last time out against the Raiders. This week, they'll be hosting from Accor Stadium in Sydney. Now, looking at the squad that's been announced so far for this week, in the backs, it includes Avarillo, Wilson, Kiraz, Burns, Adokar, Burton, and Sexton. In the forwards is King, Marnie, Knight, Kickout, Waddell, and Edwards. And on the bench is Flanagan, Thompson, Morin, and Pangai Jr. Looking at percentage stats for the Bulldogs, they have a 32% win rate, 75% completion rate, and a tackle efficiency of 85.9%. Moving on to the Seagulls, they currently sit in 12th place on the ladder. They've won 2 in the last 5, and their away record is 4 wins and 7 losses. They also lost last time out against the Warriors. Looking at the squad that they've announced so far for this week, in the backs includes Kula, Saab, Parker, Harper, Taumalo Vega, Arthur, and Cherry Evans. In the forwards is Sipley, Croker, Kepi, Olakuatu, Ben Trebojevic, and Jake Trebojevic. On the bench is Chan Kum Tong, Tuolangi, Woods, and Bullimore. Looking at percentage stats for the Seagulls, they have a 41% win rate, 78% completion rate, and a tackle efficiency of 87.5%. Now, this one is slightly less obvious. I do still think that the Seagulls are a clear favourite, but I'm going to continue on the wave that I've been pushing the last couple of weeks about the Bulldogs. Again, looking at their team on paper, I mentioned last week that they'll put in a solid effort against the Raiders, which they did do. It wasn't a bad effort, but, it wasn't close enough, which is kind of the way I assumed it would go. This week, I think the Bulldogs can certainly put in a strong effort. I do think it's fair to still look at the Seagulls as favourites, but I certainly think that there is a possibility the Bulldogs come away with a win here. I think it's very possible. So if you're going to bet on this one, I'd maybe look at a try for Adokar. Like, if you're going to do anything with this game, a try for Adokar, probably. Because I couldn't really say with much confidence that it's a win for the Bulldogs, or even a win for the Seagulls. Maybe a try for Saab, but maybe the Seagulls come out and absolutely demolish them. Maybe the Bulldogs come out and demolish the Seagulls, but I don't know, I'm just not very confident with this one. Both 4-7 in terms of home record and away record. Seagulls have only won 1 more game. I do think we've seen a little bit more from the Seagulls in terms of their competitiveness compared to other teams in losing games. And they have technically on paper been better than the Bulldogs in the last 5. So I think it is reasonable to lean towards the Seagulls, but I cannot see this being a comfortable win by any means. I think the Bulldogs will be hot on their tails the entire time. I can't see the Seagulls getting a comfortable win here. I just can't. Especially, again, with the players on paper that the Bulldogs have. I think they certainly have the quality in there to make it competitive. So if you are going to bet this weekend, I would just straight up avoid this game completely if you can. But to give a prediction anyway, because I have to, I'm going to go with the Seagulls to win 1 to 12 points. Finally for this week, we have the Newcastle Knights versus the Cronulla Sharks. Starting with the Knights, who currently sit in 7th place on the ladder. They've won 5 in the last 5, and their home record is 8 wins and 3 losses. They also won last time out against the Rabbitohs. This week, they'll be hosting from the McDonald Jones Stadium in Newcastle. Looking at the squad that they've announced so far for this week, in the backs includes Ponga, Young, Gagai, Best, Marju, Gamble, and Hastings. And the forwards it includes Jacob Saifiti, Crosland, Thompson, Frizzell, Fitzgibbon, and Elliott. On the bench is Mann, Daniel Saifiti, Hetherington, and Croker. Looking at percentage stats for the Knights, they have a 55% win rate, 75% completion rate, and a tackle efficiency of 87.9%. Moving on to the Sharks, they currently sit in 5th place on the ladder. They've won 3 in the last 5, and their away record is 7 wins and 4 losses. They also won last time out against the Cowboys. Looking at the squad that they've announced so far for this week, in the backs includes Tracy, Katoa, Ramian, Talakai, Mulatalo, Trindle, and Hines. In the forwards is Rudolph, Brayley, Hamlin-Ueli, Nikora, Graham, and McInnes. And on the bench is Williams, Hunt, Hazelton, and Moylan. Looking at percentage stats for the Sharks, they currently have a 59% win rate, 76% completion rate, and a tackle efficiency of 87.3%. So finishing off this week is another less obvious one. Maybe a few weeks ago would have easily felt the Knights were ready to dominate this game, but the Sharks have since turned their bad fortunes around. Things were not looking good for them, but they have certainly turned it around. I think last week was a really strong statement win against a competitive Cowboys team. Again, the narratives are kind of changed this week, but it was a strong performance from the Sharks to beat a team that, you know, a lot of us are considering one of the best in the league right now. But that, as I said, that narrative has kind of changed this week. So the Sharks, I think, can make this a competitive game. Part of me, it's really weird to like have this much faith in the Knights. I almost don't have that much faith in the Knights because I keep telling myself, it's the Knights. Why are you backing them so much? It's the Newcastle Knights. But they just keep doing it. You know, I keep backing them because I think they can do it. But it's just like this voice in my head telling me, you know, it's all going to come crashing down at some point. But it's just not. It's really not. And I actually feel the Knights are in the best position here because there's still, for me, a question mark over the Sharks. I think, yes, they have kind of turned things around, but I'm still a little bit unsure of how they are as a team at this point. So they've won 3 in the last 5, which is great, but I still don't fully trust them yet. Whereas with the Knights, they started winning a few games in a row. They got to 4, they got to 5, they got to 6, and now it's like, it's not just beating the teams they need to beat, they're winning competitive games too. So I think it's fair to go with the Knights on this one, and that's kind of the way it's going to go. I'm still not 100% sure with both teams because there still is that element of doubt over the Knights, even though I keep backing them and will be backing them. And there's still that element of a question mark over the Sharks, whether they're a legit team now or not. Like whether they've gotten through that rough patch, or just the smooth sailing. You know, with Braden Trindle getting the regular number 6 spot, Matt Moylan coming off the bench. So, you know, and Trindle has really kind of relished since taking up that position, which is good to see. Great kicker. And a great runner of the ball as well. So whether he retains that spot for the rest of the season, we will see. You know, if it keeps putting in strong performances, no reason why not. But I think I've got to keep going with the Knights. You know, they've had that same consistent team and the backs have been the same. The spine continues to be the same. It's really helping them that they can keep that consistency in the team. There's a real good balance with the spine, which I've mentioned before in previous weeks. I really like what the Knights are doing. So yeah, I think the Knights can get this one done. I certainly think it'll be competitive. I'm not counting out the Sharks completely. As I mentioned with the Bulldogs and the Seagulls, I would say just avoid this one. Like, if you're going to bet, maybe go with the Dominic Young try, possibly. I might still end up going with the Knights in my bet, but the smart move, and this is to also tell me when I watch this back on editing, I'm going to take the Knights to win, but don't bet on this game, whatever you do, even though I'm probably going to bet on it anyway. So I'm going to take the Knights to win 1 to 12 points. So to recap my predictions for this week, I'm going to take the Panthers and Warriors to win 13+. I'm going to take the Cowboys to win 1 to 12, Storm and Roosters both to win 13+, and the Broncos, Sea Eagles and Knights all to win 1 to 12 points. In terms of winners' confidence, I'm at about 90%. The 6 games, like the first 6 games, I'm really confident in terms of winners. So the Panthers, Warriors, Cowboys, Storm, Roosters and Broncos, I'm all really confident in them winning. But then it's the last 2 that throw me off a little bit. And in terms of margin confidence, 75%. I think all the 13+ games, I'm like 99, 100% confident with those ones. And then the Cowboys 1 to 12 could be a blowout. And then, of course, the Broncos could be a blowout. And then the Seagulls and Knights being potential losses as well, that throws it out. So 75%, I think, is where I'm at in terms of margin confidence. So that is my recap for round 25. He does actually mean round 26. Idiot. So that's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed the change in artwork. Hope that was a welcomed change. I might keep it, see how it goes. But yeah, if you have any predictions for this week, let me know in the comments down below. Also, let me know how you got on last week. But yeah, that's going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.